It all started with something small, almost insignificant. Megan, my wife, signing up for a yoga class. She mentioned it offhandedly one night after dinner. "I need something to de-stress," she said, stirring her tea and avoiding my eyes. You know, with everything at work and, well, everything. I didn't think much of it at the time. Megan's job had been demanding lately, and if an hour of stretching and mindfulness could help her unwind, who was I to argue? She deserved to take care of herself. At first, it was nice. She seemed more energetic, more relaxed. But then things started to shift. The classes weren't just twice a week anymore. They were every night. Then weekends. Soon, yoga mats and equipment started piling up in the corner of our living room, and Megan started getting ready to leave earlier than she ever needed to. I didn't think much of it until one evening when she came home later than usual. She walked through the door, her hair damp like she just showered, smelling of a faint but unfamiliar cologne. "Sorry," she said quickly, her voice unusually light. "Class ran long. We stayed to do a deep meditation." I remember nodding, telling myself not to be paranoid. But something in her smile didn't sit right. It wasn't just tired, it was different. The next week, she started dressing up for yoga. Not just workout gear but makeup, perfume, like she was going out to dinner, not a class. When I mentioned it, she brushed it off with a laugh. "You're imagining things," she said, pulling her hair into a neat ponytail. "Besides, the instructor says looking and feeling good helps you get into the right mindset." That night, I stared at the ceiling, my chest tight. Something wasn't adding up, but I pushed the thought aside. I didn't want to be that guy, the insecure, suspicious husband. Megan had given me no reason to doubt her before, right? But as the weeks passed, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was slipping between us. The unease started to eat at me. Megan wasn't just coming home late. She seemed distant. Our conversations were shorter, and her attention always seemed somewhere else. Even when she was sitting across from me at the dinner table, it felt like she wasn't really there. So, one night, when Megan left for her yoga class, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I followed her. I waited a few minutes after she pulled out of the driveway before grabbing my jacket and keys. My heart pounded as I trailed her car through the dimly lit streets. I kept a safe distance, feeling like a complete lunatic for even thinking this was necessary. But something inside me wouldn't let it go. She pulled into a small parking lot in front of a trendy yoga studio downtown. The kind of place with candles in the windows and a sign out front that read, "Align your body, free your mind." I parked across the street, staying in my car as I watched her walk inside. A few minutes later, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to just sit there, stewing in my suspicions. I crossed the street, my palms sweating, and walked into the studio. The receptionist at the front desk was a young woman with a bright smile. "Welcome. Are you here to join a class?" Yeah, I said, glancing around. "I've heard a lot about this place. Thought I'd give it a try." She handed me a clipboard to fill out a quick form. My handwriting was shaky as I scribbled my name, but I kept it together. "The class just started," she said, pointing me toward the studio door. "You can head in. First session's on the house." I pushed the door open, and the sound of soft music and low murmurs greeted me. About a dozen people were seated on yoga mats, their backs straight and eyes closed. I spotted Megan almost immediately, sitting near the front of the room. And then I saw him, the instructor. He was tall, with an easy confidence and a voice that seemed to flow like honey. His movements were fluid as he demonstrated a pose, and his gaze lingered just a little too long on Megan. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. He noticed me lingering near the back and flashed a welcoming smile. "New student?" he asked, his tone warm and friendly. "Yeah," I said, my voice tighter than I'd intended. "Come on in. Find a spot and join us." I grabbed a mat and sat down near the back of the room, watching as the class continued. The poses were simple, but my focus wasn't on the yoga. It was on the way Megan seemed so tuned into this guy. She laughed at his jokes, her posture straightened whenever he came near, and her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. As the class ended, the instructor clapped his hands together. "Great work tonight, everyone. Remember, yoga is about connection, mind, body, and spirit. People started rolling up their mats and chatting amongst themselves. I stayed in my corner, pretending to pack up slowly as I watched Megan approach the instructor. "Thanks, Asher," she said, her tone soft but full of warmth. "You're really helping me get through everything." His smile was easy and natural, but there was something beneath it I didn't like. "It's my pleasure, Megan. You're making incredible progress." The way they spoke to each other wasn't overtly inappropriate, but there was a subtle chemistry there, a familiarity that didn't sit right with me. I left before Megan noticed me, slipping out the door and back to my car. My mind raced as I sat there in the driver's seat. Was this innocent? Was I blowing things out of proportion? Or was this the beginning of something much worse? The next morning, I couldn't shake the memory of Megan and the yoga instructor, Asher, she had called him. His name alone grated on me. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, but every time I replayed their interaction in my head, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. "Good class last night?" I asked Megan over breakfast, keeping my tone light. She glanced up from her coffee. "Yeah, it was great. Asher's really helping me with my form. I'm getting better at poses I could never do before." The way she said his name, it was casual, but too casual. Like she didn't even realize how often she mentioned him. "That's good," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Maybe I should join you sometime." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth, her expression flickering with something I couldn't quite read. "Yoga's not really your thing," she said with a small laugh. "Maybe not, but it could be. Don't they say couples who work out together stay together?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You'd hate it. All that stretching and holding poses for too long. It's not exactly your style." The conversation moved on, but her reaction lingered in my mind. Why wouldn't she want me to come? Over the next week, I started paying closer attention. It wasn't just yoga. Megan had changed in subtle, but undeniable ways. She was glued to her phone more than ever, smiling at messages she wouldn't share with me. She started wearing outfits I hadn't seen before. Sleek leggings and fitted tops that looked more like something out of a fashion catalog than workout gear. When I asked about it, she brushed me off. "It's just yoga clothes," she said, shrugging. "Everyone at the studio wears stuff like this." One night, as she was getting ready to leave, I noticed she'd spent extra time on her makeup. "Another late class?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," she said, adjusting her ponytail in the mirror. "Asher's doing a special session on mindfulness. It's supposed to help with stress." I forced a smile. "He seems to be doing a lot for you." Her eyes darted to me, her smile faltering for a moment. "Yeah, he's a good teacher. That's his job." As she walked out the door, I felt the walls of my mind closing in. This wasn't just my imagination anymore. There was something going on, and if Megan wasn't going to be honest with me, I'd have to find out for myself. The following evening, I decided to follow her again. I parked across from the yoga studio, watching as she walked in. About an hour later, as the class ended, I saw her step outside. But she wasn't alone. Asher was with her. They stood by her car, talking and laughing in a way that made my chest tighten. At one point, he reached out, brushing a stray hair from her face. She didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned in slightly, her smile brighter than it had been in months. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just a friendly student-teacher relationship. My thoughts raced as I watched them. Was I seeing things? Misinterpreting an innocent gesture? Or was this exactly what it looked like? As they said goodbye, Megan climbed into her car and drove off. Asher stayed behind, watching her leave with a smile that felt like a slap in the face. I sat there in silence, my heart pounding. This wasn't just in my head anymore. Something was happening, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Megan and Asher by her car, the way they smiled at each other. It wasn't just friendly. But how was I supposed to bring it up without sounding like a jealous lunatic? For the next few days, I kept my distance emotionally, watching her closely while pretending nothing was wrong. Megan, oblivious, went about her routines like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine, not for me. I decided to dig deeper. One evening, while Megan was in the shower, I picked up her phone from the nightstand. It was locked, of course. She'd changed her passcode recently, something she hadn't done in years. That alone was a red flag. I sat there, staring at the screen, debating whether to try and guess the code. My heart raced as I entered the first thing that came to mind. My birthday. Wrong. I tried hers. Wrong again. Before I could enter a third attempt, the shower turned off, and I scrambled to put the phone back. "What are you doing?" Megan asked, stepping into the room in her bathrobe, her hair wrapped in a towel. "Just checking the time," I said, holding up my own phone with a forced smile. She glanced at me suspiciously, but then shrugged it off. "Dinner smells good," she said, walking past me toward the kitchen. My heart was still pounding. If she had nothing to hide, why would she change her passcode? The next day, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of snooping, I confronted her, indirectly. "I was thinking about taking up yoga," I said casually over breakfast. Megan looked up, startled. "Yoga? You? Why not? You've been raving about it for weeks. It sounds like it's really helping you, and I could use some of that." She hesitated, stirring her coffee. "I don't think it's your thing," she said. "Maybe not, but I'd still like to try. What's the harm?" Her eyes darted to me, then back to her coffee. I like having something that's mine, you know? Something I can do on my own." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Mine. Something that was hers. I forced a smile. "I get that, but maybe we could go together once in a while. It might be fun." She didn't respond right away, and I could see her searching for the right words. "I guess, maybe sometime. Let me think about it." I nodded, pretending to be satisfied with her answer. But deep down, I knew she'd never invite me to one of those classes, not willingly. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Megan was hiding something. I could feel it in my gut, and I wasn't going to stop until I found out what it was. That I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than Megan let on. She wasn't just distant. She was guarding something. The following evening, I decided to see for myself what happened when she wasn't aware of my presence. She had her usual yoga class, so after she left, I grabbed my jacket and headed out. This time, I didn't park across the street or linger outside. I walked right into the studio again, but instead of joining the class, I found a small alcove near the front desk where I could remain unnoticed. The class was already underway. The soft sound of the instructor's voice floated through the air, accompanied by the faint hum of relaxing music. I stayed out of sight, but I had a clear view of Megan and Asher through the glass wall separating the lobby from the studio. My heart sank as I watched them. Megan wasn't just another student in the class. She was his student. His attention lingered on her in a way it didn't for the others. He corrected her poses, his hands brushing her arms and shoulders, his voice lowering when he spoke to her. And Megan, she seemed to soak it up. She smiled at him, laughed at his jokes, and leaned in closer than necessary when he demonstrated a pose. It was subtle. To anyone else, it might have seemed harmless. But to me, it was a glaring red flag. As the class ended, I stayed hidden, watching as Megan and Asher chatted. She lingered longer than the other students, her face lighting up as they talked. At one point, he reached out and touched her arm, and she didn't flinch or pull away. When Megan finally walked out of the studio, I followed at a safe distance. I expected her to head straight home, but instead, she walked to a coffee shop down the block. And there he was, Asher. He must have taken a different exit, avoiding suspicion. They sat at a corner table, leaning in close, their conversation animated. My chest tightened as I watched them. Was I jumping to conclusions? Was this just a harmless friendship between a yoga instructor and his student? Or was it something more? I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of them through the window. My hands were shaking as I zoomed in, capturing the way they smiled at each other. The way her hand rested lightly on the edge of the table, inches away from his. I drove home in silence, my mind racing. When Megan walked through the door an hour later, she greeted me like nothing was wrong. "Hey," she said, hanging her bag by the door. "Sorry I'm late. Class ran long again." I nodded, pretending to believe her. "No problem. Dinner's in the oven." She kissed my cheek and walked into the kitchen, humming softly to herself. I sat there, staring at the photo on my phone, feeling a mix of anger, hurt, and confusion. I knew I couldn't stay silent much longer. The next day, Megan left early for work, her cheerful bye, "Love you," ringing hollow in my ears. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring at the photo I had taken of her and Asher at the coffee shop. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I knew Megan well. If I came at her without undeniable proof, she'd twist the situation and make me feel like the bad guy. I needed more than just a photo. That evening, I decided to test her. "What time's your class tonight?" I asked casually over dinner. "Same as always," she said, cutting her food into neat bites. "Mind if I tag along?" Her fork paused midway to her mouth. She looked up, startled, but quickly recovered. "Oh, tonight's not a great night. It's one of those more advanced sessions, and you'd hate it." I raised an eyebrow. I thought yoga was for everyone, no matter their skill level. "Well, yeah, but this one's different. It's a lot of focus on breathing and balance, really boring stuff if you're not into it." Her explanation felt flimsy, but I didn't push. "Fair enough. Maybe next time." She nodded quickly, clearly relieved. "Sure, maybe." When she left for her class, I decided to follow her again. This time, though, I wanted a closer look. I parked in the same spot as before but didn't go inside the studio. Instead, I waited until the class ended and watched from a distance as the students filed out. Megan and Asher emerged together, talking animatedly. My chest tightened as I saw Megan lean in, laughing at something he said. They walked to her car, and I tensed, expecting him to leave, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned casually against her car, and they continued their conversation. Megan fidgeted with her keys, smiling nervously, and then it happened. He placed his hand on her arm, his thumb brushing her skin. It wasn't just a friendly gesture. It was intimate. I clenched my fists, struggling to stay in control. When they finally said their goodbyes, Megan got into her car and drove off. I tailed her, half expecting her to meet up with him again, but she went straight home. When she walked through the door, I was waiting for her. "How was yoga?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Good," she said, slipping off her shoes. "Exhausting, but good." She didn't look me in the eye as she said it, and I felt my chest tighten. "That's great," I said, forcing a smile. "You must really love it, spending so much time there." "Yeah," she said, her tone light. "It's been a real lifesaver." I watched her carefully, searching for any sign of guilt or hesitation, but she seemed completely at ease. It wasn't until later, when she was asleep beside me, that I realized the truth. Megan wasn't just hiding something. She had gotten good at it. After weeks of suspicion and watching from the sidelines, I couldn't sit back any longer. I had followed Megan. I had seen the chemistry between her and Asher, and I had the photo from the coffee shop. But none of that was enough. It was circumstantial, easy to deny. I needed more. The opportunity came one afternoon when Megan left her laptop open on the dining table. She was in the shower, and the sound of running water told me I had a few minutes at most. My heart pounded as I sat down and opened the screen. It was locked. Of course. I thought back to her phone's passcode and tried the same combinations. My birthday, hers, the anniversary. Nothing worked. My frustration was building until I glanced at the post-it note tucked under the edge of the keyboard. It was mostly obscured, but I could make out a few numbers. I tried them, and the screen unlocked. My hands trembled as I clicked through her emails. Most were routine, work messages, promotional junk. But then I found it. An email chain with Asher. The subject line read, "Thanks for last night." My stomach turned as I opened the thread. The messages weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. The tone was casual, filled with inside jokes and references to shared moments. "Asher, hope you slept well after that intense session. You're a natural, by the way." "Megan, thanks." Smiling face with smiling eyes. "It's easy to feel comfortable with you. I can't tell you how much I needed that." "Asher, anytime. Same time tomorrow?" I stared at the screen, my chest tightening with every word. This wasn't just a teacher and student relationship. There was an intimacy in their messages, an unspoken familiarity that made my stomach churn. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. I needed to keep digging. Her calendar app was next. I clicked through the upcoming events, And there it was, private yoga session, Asher scheduled for the next afternoon. I leaned back in the chair, my mind racing. She hadn't mentioned anything about a private session. Why would she? She had been keeping this a secret all along. When Megan came out of the shower, I was back in the living room, pretending to scroll through my phone. "You okay?" she asked, toweling off her hair. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "Just tired. Long day." She smiled sympathetically, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "I'll make it up to you. Dinner tomorrow?" "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. But I already knew what I would be doing tomorrow, following her to that private session. The next day, I called out of work, my stomach churning as I prepared to follow Megan. Her private session with Asher was at 3 p.m., according to her calendar. She hadn't mentioned it over breakfast, just another red flag to add to the growing pile. When she left the house, I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. I knew the route by now, but this time was different. This wasn't just about catching her at a coffee shop or seeing an innocent exchange after class. If my suspicions were right, I was about to walk straight into the truth I'd been dreading. I parked down the street from the yoga studio and watched as Megan walked inside. A few minutes later, Asher arrived. He greeted her at the door with a smile that made my blood boil, then locked the front door behind them. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Locked doors? During a private session? My mind spiraled as I imagined the worst. I couldn't just sit there. I needed to know. I got out of the car and walked around the side of the building, looking for a window or a back entrance. The blinds on the front windows were closed, but I found a narrow gap near the side entrance where I could see inside. What I saw stopped me cold. Megan and Asher were in the center of the studio, sitting on their yoga mats. The session hadn't even started yet. They were just talking. But it wasn't the kind of casual, surface-level conversation you'd expect between a teacher and a student. Megan was laughing, her hand brushing his arm as she spoke. And then Asher leaned in. My breath caught in my throat as he reached out, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. It was such a small, intimate gesture, but the way she smiled at him afterward made it clear. This wasn't innocent. They were too close, too comfortable. I felt sick. My worst fears were unfolding right in front of me, and I couldn't do anything about it. Not yet. I stepped back from the window, my chest heaving as I struggled to process what I'd just seen. Part of me wanted to burst inside, to confront them right then and there. But another part of me knew I needed to be smarter. If I barged in now, Megan would deny everything, and Asher would likely back her up. I needed undeniable proof, something that would force them to admit the truth. I pulled out my phone and started recording. The angle wasn't great, but I managed to capture a few seconds of their interaction through the gap in the blinds. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I drove home, my mind raced. This wasn't just about catching Megan in a lie anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my sense of control. That evening, Megan came home, her mood light and cheerful. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down. "How was your day?" "Good," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Mine was great," she said, heading to the kitchen. "The class was amazing. Asher's really helping me get stronger." The mention of his name made my stomach turn, but I forced a smile. "That's good to hear." As she talked about her day, I nodded along, pretending to listen. But all I could think about was the video on my phone, the proof that something was happening behind my back. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, but the time was coming. And when it did, I knew there would be no turning back. The following evening, Megan seemed more carefree than usual, humming to herself as she folded laundry in the living room. I sat on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, but my mind was a storm of emotions. The video I had taken during her private session with Asher sat on my phone, burning a hole in my pocket. I had replayed it a dozen times, each viewing stoking the anger and betrayal simmering inside me. I couldn't wait any longer. "Megan," I said, my voice steady but firm. She looked up, her smile faltering slightly at my tone. "Yeah, can we talk?" Her brow furrowed. "Of course. What's up?" I set my phone down on the coffee table, leaning forward. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay," she said slowly, sitting down across from me. What's going on with you and Asher? Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she just stared at me. Then she laughed, a nervous, hollow sound. What? Nothing. What are you talking about? You've been spending a lot of time at the studio lately, I said, keeping my tone measured. Private sessions, late nights. I saw the way he looks at you, Megan. I saw the way you look at him. Her expression hardened. You're being ridiculous. He's my yoga instructor, Ethan. That's all. I leaned back, studying her face. Then why didn't you tell me about the private session yesterday? Her eyes darted away, just for a second, but it was enough. I didn't think it was a big deal, she said, her voice tight. I needed extra help with some poses. That's all it was. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling slightly. You're sure about that? Yes, she said, crossing her arms. I don't know why you're acting like this. I unlocked my phone and pulled up the video. Then explain this. I held the screen toward her, playing the clip of her and Asher laughing, leaning close, his hand brushing her hair. Her face drained of color as she stared at the video, her lips parting slightly. For a moment, she said nothing, the tension between us stretching like a rubber band about to snap. Were you following me? She finally asked, her voice rising. That's what you're worried about? I shot back, my voice sharp. Not the fact that you've been lying to me for weeks? Not the fact that you're spending all this time with him behind my back? I wasn't lying, she snapped, standing up, and I wasn't doing anything wrong. Then why didn't you tell me about the session? I demanded, standing to face her. Why didn't you tell me you were meeting him for coffee, or that he locks the doors during your private sessions? If it's all so innocent, why are you hiding it? Her mouth opened and closed as she searched for a response, but no words came. I trusted you, Megan, I said, my voice breaking. I trusted you, and now I don't even know who you are anymore. She crossed her arms, her expression defensive. You're blowing this way out of proportion. There's nothing going on, Ethan. I can't believe you don't trust me. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. Trust? You've given me nothing but reasons to doubt you. And now, you're standing here, lying to my face. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. If this is nothing, then prove it, I said, holding her gaze. Show me your phone. Let me see your messages with Asher. Her face crumpled for a moment, but then she set her jaw. No, that's not fair. You're invading my privacy. Privacy? I repeated, my voice rising. What about the vows we made? What about being honest and open with each other? If you have nothing to hide, then show me. She stood there, silent and unmoving, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. And in that moment, I knew. I didn't need to see her phone. Her silence said it all. Megan's silence was deafening. She refused to hand over her phone, refused to give me anything that might prove her innocence. And as much as I wanted to keep pressing her, I realized I didn't need to. The truth was already there, staring me in the face. I can't believe this, I said, stepping back, my voice hollow. After everything we've been through, after all these years, this is what it comes to? Megan's face crumpled as tears began to spill down her cheeks. Ethan, you don't understand. No, I cut her off, my voice sharp. You don't get to say that. I understand perfectly. I've been here, trying to make this marriage work, while you've been, what? Flirting with your yoga instructor? Spending hours with him while I sit at home wondering why you've pulled away? It's not what you think, she insisted, her voice breaking. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I felt like I couldn't breathe, Ethan. Like I wasn't myself anymore. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. So instead of talking to me, instead of working through it together, you ran to him? She wiped her eyes, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. Unbelievable, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. Do you even realize what you've done? How much damage you've caused? Megan looked up at me, her eyes filled with guilt and pain. I never wanted to hurt you. Yeah, well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You did. After our confrontation, Megan spent the night in the guest room. I stayed up, my mind racing with questions I couldn't bring myself to ask. How long had this been going on? How deep did it run? The next morning, Megan left the house early, claiming she needed time to clear her head. I didn't stop her. Instead, I decided to do something I'd never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. It felt like a low blow, but I needed answers. I needed to know the full truth, no matter how painful it was. The investigator's findings came faster than I expected. Within days, I had a file in my hands, complete with photos, dates, and receipts. It wasn't just coffee shop meetings and private sessions. There were dinners, long phone calls, and even a weekend trip Megan had claimed was a work retreat. As I flipped through the file, my hands shaking, I realized there was no going back. Megan hadn't just crossed a line. She'd obliterated it that evening. When Megan came home, I was waiting for her. The file sat on the coffee table between us like a loaded gun. "What's this?" she asked cautiously, glancing at the folder. "Proof," I said coldly, "of everything you've been doing behind my back." Her face paled as she opened the file, her eyes scanning the pages. "You hired someone to spy on me?" she said, her voice rising. "I did," I said, my tone flat. "And it looks like I had every reason to." Megan sank onto the couch, her hands trembling as she flipped through the evidence. "Ethan, Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Don't make excuses. Don't try to justify this. Just admit what you've done." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "I messed up," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, but Stop," I said sharply. "I don't want to hear it." For the first time in my life, I felt truly done. After Megan's confession, I made my decision. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. If she wanted to tear our marriage apart, fine, but I wasn't going to be the one left picking up the pieces. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends, and focusing on myself for the first time in years. And then, one night, something unexpected happened. I met someone. Her name was Elena, and she was everything Megan wasn't: kind, genuine, and unapologetically honest. We met at a friend's party, and what started as a simple conversation quickly turned into something more. For the first time in months, I felt seen. I felt valued. At first, I felt guilty about seeing Elena. It wasn't like me to cheat, even after what Megan had done. But the more time I spent with her, the more I realized how much I had been missing in my marriage. One night, after another argument with Megan, I found myself at Elena's place. We talked for hours, and as the night went on, I realized something. I didn't owe Megan anything anymore. She had made her choices. Now, I was making mine. Eventually, Megan found out about Elena. I didn't try to hide it. When she confronted me, I met her anger with calm resolve. "You don't get to play the victim," I told her. "Not after everything you've done." Megan looked at me, her face a mix of shock and hurt. "So, this is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This has been it for a long time," I said. "You just didn't want to admit it." In the end, we signed the divorce papers without much fanfare. Megan moved out, and I kept the house. It wasn't easy, but as I stood in the now empty living room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Megan's betrayal had shattered me, but it also showed me my own strength. And as I started a new chapter of my life, with Elena by my side, I realized that sometimes even the worst heartbreak can lead to something better.